Hello, welcome to Narwhal News. This is our weekly podcast series where we will be covering all the important FRC updates, competition predictions, and fun happenings within the FRC community. We are from Team 3128 and FRC Robotics team from San Diego and Canyon Crest Academy. My name is Bryn and this is our first episode. Since the Reefscape game just kicked off, let's go to Oliver with an introduction to the game and our strategic analysis on the game. I'm here now with Oliver, a senior member of our strategy department. Oliver, can you give us a quick introduction of this year's game?
Reefscape, our 2025 game, is an aquatic-themed game that centers around the reef. The goal is to de-algae the reef, as well as collect algae from the ground that can be scored in the upper area in the net, or you can score it in your processor. It also focuses on scoring coral on the reef to help rebuild the reef. There are some rather unique elements to this year's game. First of all, we have a subdivided field and a likes we haven't seen since Recycle Rush back in 2015. And we have similar unique rules like Deep Space. Actually, I guess it's more like Deep Space than Recycle Rush, but there is that nature of the barge in the middle of the field dividing the field similarly to Recycle Rush. But then we draw the one defense rule from from Deep Space, where you're unable to have multiple robots on your opponent's alliance at the same time. We feel that this will introduce a lot of unique elements to this game, unlike previous years.
Oliver, as we've seen this year, the RP amount has been increased from 4 to 6. Do you have any thoughts about that?
So the number one thing on the 4 to 6 RP increase is actually that the proportion from a win increases based on previous years, whereas in previous years, a win was only 2 RP worth. Now it's 3. So if you win, that's equivalent to getting all 3 RP instead of just 2. However, in this year's game, the 3 RP for bonuses actually look quite easy compared to past years, with both the climb RP and the auto RP being very achievable on any alliance with a capable robot. However, cooperation will be really important to get that final coral RP, as without the cooperation bonus, it'll be really hard to score enough coral on all the levels.
I know you mentioned an auto ranking point. Do you think autos will be particularly important this year? And if so, are there any viable strategies you've seen so far?
Actually, yes. I think autos are going to be really important this year, as we've already seen from some, I think it was it Mechanical Advantage or Rembrandt's? We already saw a 4-piece coral level 1 auto on a kitbot, which shows that there's high potential for high coral autos this year. I would definitely expect some of the top teams to have 4-piece L4 autos by the time we get to Worlds, and that's like an entire 28 points just from auto, which will also help the coral RP be very manageable. In addition, autos will be relevant throughout from week 1 to Worlds, not just for points, but because you need to score that 1 coral to get your RP. And every robot should be sure to have a leave auto, as every robot needs to leave to get that auto RP.
Perfect. I know you mentioned G421. That's the one defender rule. How do you think defense will play out this year? We saw last year 321 did a great job at championships, but do you have any thoughts about that for this year's game?
I actually think defense is going to be really impactful this game, as we have established choke points in the coral stations, since those aren't protected at all. It'll be really hard to have 3 robots cycling on 1 coral station, so having a defense bot will basically force your opponents to abandon 3 coral cycling robots. And then after that, you can play defense on either robot left.
Perfect, thank you. And in terms of eliminations, how do you think that will play out? I know we saw in Crescendo there were some upsets with lower alliances running triple offense, but do you have any thoughts or predictions about that for this year?
I think this year is actually going to be really different, as I mentioned before about defense. Having a triple offense robot in such a triple offense alliance in such a compact area against a defense bot is going to make it really difficult, because you're just going to be so congested on cycles, where 2 robots can have much more freedom. And in the past, lower alliances have relied on triple offense to overcome the higher scoring potential of the 2 higher seeds. So I think this year, higher alliances will have a big advantage, and we'll be seeing less upsets.
Perfect, thank you so much. And Oliver, for my final question, do you have any ideas about how the role of algae will play out? We've seen that algae can be put in many different spots throughout the game, in the processor, in the net, but do you have any idea of, how it'll help contribute to wins or how it won't contribute to wins?
I think algae is going to have a weird curve where it's going to be pretty relevant in early weeks as teams that have lower capabilities look to the processor for scoring, and with less practiced human players, there's a greater chance that algae will be missed, thus increasing the relevance of the processor. However, I think as we get to the middle weeks and teams improve in their coral scoring abilities, algae will sort of decline in significance as the raw scoring potential of coral takes over. However, as then we get to Worlds, I think teams will have reached such high coral scoring potentials at that level that 2 robots will be adequately able to fill out most of the reef on their own, and then algae will then play an importance in supplemental scoring, as well as being a way to run a triple offense alliance without being really congested in defense.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Oliver, for answering my questions. Next, we'll be back with a Robot in 3 Days summary with another member of our strategy department, Rainer. Our strategy department has spent a lot of time over the last couple of days analyzing the Robot in 3 Days, or RI3D, threads on Chief Delphi. I'm here with Rainer, another senior member of our strategy department, to discuss some of the Robot in 3 Day threads. Rainer, what are our top 3 rankings of Robot in 3 Days?
Okay, so for our number 3 spot, we put Rust Hounds. They're a really solid robot. We saw a lot of strengths. But the reason we put them in number 3 originally was because, well, for one, they're running a tank drive, which isn't uncommon among RI3Ds, but it's still kind of a weak point. It slows down the robot. Another thing is that we noticed that the robot's a little bit shaky when it drives, and it has a little bit of trouble scoring in L1. But one of its strong points that really made it stand out from the rest of the RI3D robots was that it had a 2.5 piece auto, which is something pretty unique, especially in 3 days. For our number 2 spot, we put Quackos 2, which was kind of a sideways elevator robot with a double-sided manipulator. And basically how it worked was the manipulator would be able to flip either way to pick up either algae or coral. And it also worked pretty quickly. Like, there wasn't a lot of delay in the cycle just because of the flipping or whatever it was. Okay, for our honorable mentions, we put Quacka 1, which was like we call it a low spam bot, because basically how it worked is it would cycle L1 very constantly, but it wouldn't be able to score the upper levels like L2, L3, L4. We left it in our honorable mentions over other like L2, L3, L4, L1 bots, because although it can only score in L1, it was able to score in L1 very quickly, and it had a deep climb. And to be honest, I think we're going to see a lot of robots like that, especially during the game, even though it might not be like as high scoring, especially since it's a lot easier to build, and it's just a lot faster in general. Another honorable mention we have is Cranberry Alarm, and although their robot isn't as like impressive as the other robots on this list, they're one of the first RI3Ds to release, and they pretty much covered every aspect of the game other than the climb. For our number 1 spot, we put Penn State, and although they didn't have like everything, they pretty much had all of the important aspects of a good robot that we'd expect to see during like the actual season, which is pretty surprising, especially considering that they built this in only 3 days. Like, they had swerve drive. They were able to score at all levels, like pretty efficiently. And something really, really impressive that they did was that they were able to take algae out of the reef while also scoring at the same time.
All right, thanks for sharing, Rainer. Do you have any, design mechanisms or kind of robot archetypes that you've seen over the last couple days and while reading through these RI3D threads? And do you have any predictions on how those might play out when we move on to the competition weeks of Reefscape?
Yeah, so I think we're going to see a lot of sideways elevator robots. Those are pretty efficient. I think that's probably going to be the easiest way that robots are going to be able to manipulate. And I also mentioned the L1 spam bot, which it kind of looks like the Quacka from last year, if you remember that. And so basically, it might not be like the most world's optimized robot, but it is pretty fast. And honestly, if a team builds it really well, it could be like a pretty high scoring, high ranking robot, especially if they have like that deep climb and they consistently put up like 10 pieces at least.
All right, thank you so much for joining us today, Rainer. I'm back with Abraham, another member of our strategy department, here to discuss open alliances.
Hello, I'm Abraham. I'm a junior. I'm a strategy member on the team, as Bryn mentioned.
Abraham, do you have a favorite open alliance thread at the moment?
There's definitely been like quite a few open alliance threads that I've been a fan of, but one I find myself repeatedly going back to like over and over again, like pretty much every day, is Team 4481 Rembrandts. And with like all the useful stuff when it comes to like strategy or prototyping or archetypes or even just messing around with their human field. All of their videos have been really useful, in my opinion, to like look at as like a starting point, because not every team may be able to like have a full field or test on the conditions they have. And like what I really liked is they took requests for dropping different items such as coral and algae, and just testing out different things on the field to allow people to sort of get an idea of what's going on the field.
Perfect. Yeah, their 3DM analysis and their videos have been a great help to the FRC community for sure this season. Are there any other open alliance threads that come to mind on Chief Delphi?
Another one that comes to mind is Team 111 Wild Sting. I think what I also really liked about this was that they dropped their functional requirements and what they really want to do, and then started working on like prototypes and really got some archetypes going early that work. And it's been really useful for us to like consider, what kind of archetypes are there going to be in this game, what may be able to work, or what ideas can we gather from them. And that's sort of like been our base point from it. And overall, I also really like some of their archetypes on like picking up algae and coral together, that big shoot intake. I think could definitely see some play, or just in general, even just working off of a certain archetype, because they said they tried building off of Cranberry Alarm and sort of what they were building, but they added their own twists and tried to make it more viable for different things. For example, trying to get L4 more consistent, or make the shoot less jam less, that sort of thing.
Perfect. Okay, now Abraham, I noticed you haven't mentioned Spectrum yet, and Spectrum has been a pretty big Open Alliance favorite of mine. Do you have any hot takes or speculation or analysis of their thread? What do you think?
Yeah, so something I really like about Spectrum is just getting deep into prototyping immediately, sort of trying out literally every possibility with game pieces. For example, they tested lots of different combinations of coral intakes, whether it be like trying to do it from the ground or trying to do it from station, that sort of thing, or just dealing with algae. I really like all their prototyping, and it's been really useful in the early days to try to get stuff done and sort of see what other teams have been building. Although one part I do disagree on is some of their ideas on what strategies may be like later in the season. For example, they're saying that they believe net scoring at Worlds may be really important due to the limited scoring on the Reef. For example, they think like the Reef will max out pretty quickly, and which isn't wrong, because you can only score 36 on L2, L3, L4, and then maybe like 12 to 24 pieces on L1. It's likely fillable at the world level. But something I disagree with is the viability of stealing algae from the opponent's side for points, because going to the other
Protected zone.
Exactly. So there's protected zones that may draw fouls, and your opponent has better visibility in that field, so they might just be able to steal the algae, and you might not get nothing or get anything. But also, in that time to get 4 points, you can easily do 2 L1 cycles if needed by just cycling from the station and back, or even ground intake if your team has it. And also, the viability of putting balls into your net, I will agree, is nice, especially if your team has the capability to build it. 4 points is no joke, especially at a world level. But as you put more and more balls into the net, let's say 7 or 8 or even 9 balls, it becomes a lower probability of your human player hitting a shot, because it's more filled up and it has a high probability of just missing, which means that the other team could theoretically just put a bunch of algae at the end of the game into the processor, and that just makes it really hard for your human player to get shots off, and which means that you might be able to just pull away with the deficit if you're getting 6 points for every processor make, and your opponent just can't hit their human player shots for to cut the deficit down. And that's sort of my belief. Although if you're a team that has the capability to build algae net, I think it's still nice to have it, especially at the Worlds level, where you have 3 very capable like offensive cycling bots.
Yeah, that sounds pretty reasonable. Human players will definitely be important this year for sure. Thank you so much for joining us today, Abraham, and for your open alliance insight.
Yeah, no problem.
To close off this week's episode of Narwhal News, we're going to start by recapping some of the major updates from Team Update 2, which came out earlier this week. First of all, Section 6.5.4's language was changed. This is a section regarding the auto RP, which required from all enabled robots leave the starting zone and score at least one coral in the L1 trough. The enabled wording was changed to all non-bypass robots, meaning if your robot seemed to mysteriously disconnect from FMS or was never connected in the first place, them not leaving the starting zone would not disqualify you from the auto RP. Additionally, G435 was added, making it so that the human player cannot store more than 4 algae in the processor area unless the human player is making an effort to clear out the processor by entering additional algae into the net. And the violation for this would be 1 major foul per additional algae. There were also some dimension changes. For example, the bottom of the cage to carpet distance for the shallow and deep climbs were changed. For the deep climb, it went from 3.5 inches to 3 1/8 inches. For the shallow climb, it changed from 2 feet and 5 3/8 inches to 2 feet 6 1/8 inches. Additionally, the dimensions for algae changed with Team Update 2. Previously, there was a wider range of variability for the acceptable diameter of algae. Now, the acceptable range for algae is between 16 inches and 16.5 inches. So, reducing the range from plus or minus 0.5 inches on one side to plus or minus 1/4. Additionally, for the processor, they clarified that there would need to be 2 algae scored in each alliance's processor. So, making it so that another alliance could potentially score in the opposing alliance's processor in order to gain the cooperation ranking point. Additionally, an exception was made to G409, meaning that robots won't be fouled for scoring coral while contacting, for example, L1. Additionally, from Team Update 2, we also saw that there were 2 different algae balls, but that seems to have been clarified in an additional blog post. Thank you so much for watching Narwhal News this week. We're so excited to have you guys here. Keep on swimming, and we'll see you next week.